Welcome to the 22nd episode of Redeeming the Time. I'm your host, Jake Wells. This is my dad, my co-host, Keith Eric Wells. And thank you for joining us.
Are you awake?
I'm alive.
We put this off 3 days longer than we normally do. We typically record on a Thursday, and
Camp Chautauqua was this weekend,
came up. So how was camp?
It was awesome. Yeah.
And
It was a good time. This was the first one I planned and everything with Brent helping me, so
yeah.
it was good.
What was your most memorable thing of the weekend?
Well, it's a sad one, but it was Brent's
message.
Brent's last sermon at the end. That was
as the leader. He'll speak again.
Yeah,
sometime,
obviously,
but
as the youth pastor. So
very cool. Very cool.
it was cool. There was other things that happened during the weekend that I didn't get to watch very much of, but there's two sports that we're playing that I care about.
Yeah, this will be old news by the time this shows up on the internet, but
Xander Schauffele won the PGA Championship. I believe he beat the record at 21 under by draining a 10-foot putt to win by
doing
the toilet bowl.
Huh.
And
he led the whole time. That was crazy.
Shot a 9 under the first round.
It actually made me watch. I mean, because I normally, that and all the silly stuff with
Rory.
No, not Rory.
Scheffler.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was random.
Yeah, that was just bad on everyone's part there.
And DeChambeau put the pressure on him by tying it, by I think birdieing the last hole. So he knew what he had to do going in, and he just piped a 325-yard drive right down Broadway.
Down Broadway. Yep.
So
mixing my sports there.
Yeah. So that happened, and then I've paid attention to NBA playoffs more than I ever have
only
before.
care about NBA at the playoffs because it's just not basketball until that point.
Yeah.
It's one-on-one.
Yeah.
I did watch the end of that game last night with the Timberwolves and the
Nuggets.
Yeah. And
I think whoever won that game is going to win the whole thing.
We'll find out.
Now that I said that on here,
they might be so tired that now they play the Mavericks. I think.
Well, everyone played a 7-game series besides the Celtics.
Yeah, they're going to get a little extra rest, but the Mavs have a chance to beat them. But if the Mavs win, that's the East's best chance of winning.
The Mavs? Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think they can beat the Timberwolves. Yeah. The East isn't that good. So, but
Celtics
like I said, I don't
only...
watch that much of it. I know who the main folks are, but that's about it.
Well, that's the thing that got me is that there's new.
Yeah, there's new blood. Yeah,
it's not LeBron
all the old
guys.
They're all watching this year.
Yeah, which I enjoyed. Getting to know them more.
All the people you watched play college ball.
Yeah, I'm older than Anthony Edwards by 3 years.
Now we completely alienated like 95% of who watch because they don't watch the NBA at all, and I really don't blame them. So.
Yeah. College is better though.
Yeah, this weekend is the IndyCar. Now that's even a smaller group of people, and Dave is going. Brother Dave, enjoy. Him and Hannah are going. She got it for his, for Christmas gift. Yeah. And I think she likes it more than he does. So, Dave, give us a full report, all right?
Yeah.
And we shall find out.
All right, so we got Nehemiah 8 to Job 7.
Yeah, so we'll finish Nehemiah, go through the book of Esther, and then into Job.
So Monday we have Nehemiah 8 through 9. And in chapter 8, we have Ezra here.
Yeah, so Ezra now is an older man because he'd already been there for some years, and now he is reading to the people. I love this chapter, actually. It says in verse 3, and those that could understand. He talks. And then, did you notice verse 4? It uses the word pulpit. It's the only spot where that word shows up.
Pulpit of wood, yeah, I do remember reading that.
So I wondered, I didn't do much history on this, so who wants to do that, they can. Is this the genesis of this word and its usage, a wood pulpit? That's what we've always called that.
Yeah.
It's the only time that word, that Hebrew word, is used as pulpit. So I don't know. But here's the part I loved, verses 7 and 8. Cause the people to understand the law. So these Levites are causing the people to understand the law, and gave them the sense and caused them to understand the reading. The most basic necessity of the Word of God is understanding it and its application in life. That's why we're doing this. I mean, it's so we can understand and we can read the Word of God together, so we can understand it and apply it in our life. And that's what he sees them doing. For them just to get up and read the law without explaining it, and it causes, verse 10, the people understood they had sinned, so they were weeping because they understand God's law. And then we see at the end of that sin, the joy of the Lord is your strength. Yeah, they realize it. I love it.
Yeah, they end up rejoicing in it. Yeah. That they have the law. And,
right.
Yeah.
Then they end the chapter with the Feast of Tabernacles. I think that verse 17, I don't think that means that they never observed that feast, because we know they did. I think it meant they didn't observe it with actually making booths outside their homes in the fashion like Joshua did. So I think that's the explanation there.
Yeah.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9 is the confession of the Israelites' sins over the years. You see the continual theme of the disobedience that we've been reading. They emphasize that God had taken care of them, and that they left God. God did not leave them.
Yeah, that's a really good way of saying that.
So, and also mentions that they did this when they got comfortable, like what we were talking about last week with Haggai, and so.
Yeah, acknowledging God's mercy, their own hard hearts, and then they make a covenant with the Lord, those that are there, which will then go into the next chapter, chapter 10.
Yeah, but at the end of the last chapter, or the last verse, 38, and because of all this we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites, and priests seal unto it. So I've heard so many messages on this, and coming off of Camp Chautauqua, this goes right along with it, where you make the covenant, you make a promise, you make a decision for the Lord, you write it down, you have a level of accountability there. I think of it as like signing a contract, and then you seal it, you confirm it, you lock it in your life. And because a promise without action and discipline is just a wish. And
we need to write things down. Some people go overboard with that kind of thing where they want you make a pledge on every little decision you make.
Yeah.
We can't be doing that every Sunday with a decision we make, but there are major points in our life. I think that you need to make some note of this, some reminder of this in your life that this is the direction I'm going, because we will forget. We forget the feeling, we forget the emotion involved, we forget the circumstances, but we see our name, we see that item, whatever it might be. Bill Hayes is very good about that, where he'll have that item for you. Some people respond to that better than others, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
As a teenager, I had the emotions of camp, and I would follow the first two of making the decision and writing it down, but I didn't take the next step, or I did the first one and not the next two, or whatever. So I just thought it was something to point out. Tuesday, Nehemiah 10 and 11. So this chapter is all about committing to the things of the Lord that were once in place before the captivity.
Big, long list of men that signed this covenant that was just mentioned in chapter 9. They'd stay separate. They'd be faithful in their business, verses 30 and 31. Then verses 32 to 39, faithful in their offerings, their tithing, keeping the Sabbath, even the 7-year rest. They're mentioning all those things.
Yep. And it ends with, and we will not forsake the house of our God. Yep. I thought that was cool.
When we get to chapter 11, chapter 11 is an interesting chapter. It is the opposite of what we would think about. The city has been, the temple's been built, the wall has been rebuilt, but they destroyed the whole city when they came in. And even through this amount of time, there are still a lot of places. People have gone to their inheritance and they've built their homes and they've redone their fields. And I mean, if you were to go over there, a lot of very hilly areas. So when they do vineyards and when they do, they're terraced. And there's a lot of upkeep in that type of thing. So they spend a lot of time on it. The city is still somewhat in ruins. So chapter 11, they actually have almost like a lottery for who has to stay in the city, not who gets to, who has to stay in the city.
One out of 10.
Yeah, they have to move into the city. Now the leaders do, and they sort of like by example they did this. But I mean, by having to live in the city, you lose money. You're not raising crops. You don't have livestock. And so just to understand what's going on there, you lose opportunity by staying in the city. You would probably have to start a business versus being agricultural. So verses 3 through 24, it lists all those people that were living in Jerusalem, and then the remainder of the chapter, those that were living around there in Judea. So that's chapter 11.
This kind of reminded me of like some of the dispersion of the tribes and stuff in the Pentateuch, and that, like, where the telling people where to go and stuff. I don't know, because it's basically a new nation again. They're coming back. And they have
you mean like with Joshua, where they would?
Joshua.
When Joshua divvied up the land. Yeah,
because they're coming back. They weren't there before.
Yeah, that's true, and it's basically who gets the short straw.
Yeah,
that's how it worked there. Where the other ones seem to be at least, everybody. Wow, I get to go here. Yeah. This is our land. We get to conquer this one.
I gotta stay here.
I gotta clean up someone else's mess, where they just burned down a house and I gotta rebuild it after 100 years. So, oh well.
So now we go into Wednesday, and we have Nehemiah 12, the last two chapters of Nehemiah here. And
a lot of short things. Well, there are actually long chapters to read, but not many compared to the next few days. They're like 5 chapters apiece, but they're short and fun to read.
We do Esther in 2 days.
Yeah. Which, we'll get to that in a minute. But.
So chapter 12 is the dedication of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the priests with the list of the priests and the Levites who originally came with Zerubbabel, and then gets into the dedication and what a joyous occasion it was put yourself in their shoes, like after so many years of not doing anything, being comfortable, and then Nehemiah comes in and they finish it, and
major sense of accomplishment.
Yeah. 2 big choirs marching on the wall, singing praises.
And what makes it more memorable than having this type of celebration? You celebrate those things that you want to continue and that you want to be in the memory of folks. They could have easily said, "Good job, have a nice day," and they would have all lived on in their life. But now there's this indelible memory of this and all of their history now that God had done this for them. So it's a smart thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Anything else in 12?
There's the lineage of the priest Joshua there, but other than that, nothing that you wouldn't understand. I think you would generally understand as you read through it.
Yeah, 13. There's a lot more here.
This is a chapter, isn't it?
13 is packed. So he starts with Nehemiah recapping the covenant they made with God to not take strange wives, to keep the temple and the things of God holy.
Yeah.
And then we get into a few examples of how they failed at this. There's 5 examples.
Yeah, so there's something that happens here. Apparently, Nehemiah at the beginning, the king had asked him, "How long are you going to be there?" And he gave him an answer, which we don't really read, but he goes back to the king, and after a certain period of time, we see he's allowed to come back and be a governor again. So there's this space of time, and during that space of time, we just see they just go right back to the same junk. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So the first example is Eliashib, the high priest.
The high priest, not just some random dude that was a leader. No, this is the guy, the high priest. Yeah.
he makes an alliance with our good friend Tobiah, who was one of the people that was mocking the work of the wall that you see in Nehemiah 6:19. And he's the one that, well, that's 6:19 is where you see that he was sending letters to Nehemiah trying to scare him.
Right.
And he was one of those guys that was mocking the work of the Lord.
Right. Yeah. So he lets him come in, not just inside the wall. He literally is living in a room in the temple.
A great chamber, it says.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So Nehemiah,
comes in and kicks him out.
Yeah. I have down here, mind-boggling. It really is. He throws him out. He throws all of his stuff out.
Yeah.
You sort of like think of like a couple that's getting in a fight,
chucking
and
TVs out the window,
throwing his stuff out the window type stuff, and that's sort of the vision I have here.
Yeah, and he has him clean the chamber. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second example, the leaders were not giving the Levites their dues or the portion of their tithes,
and the singers. Yeah.
Yeah. All the other workers. So again.
Yeah.
Nehemiah comes in and
like we've said many times, if the system that God has put in place isn't followed, it starts to break down. And so the Levites are going back to their fields because they're starving and they have to survive. So they're not giving the offerings to them like they were supposed to. So he gets that all rectified.
Yeah, and sets like treasurers and people in positions
because they're unwilling to do it properly.
And in verse 13 you see why these different people were chosen at the end. For they were counted faithful, and their office was to they were counted faithful.
Yeah.
They were faithful in their work. So
all right, next one, 15 through 22. I like this. This one cracks me up too. The Sabbath rest is restored. The people he found they were working, they were selling stuff on the Sabbath, and even other people were coming into the city. So the first thing he has them do is basically Friday night, when it got dark, the beginning of Sabbath, the gates of the city were closed, and they weren't allowed to sell anything. So it tells in verses 20 and 21, the first couple weeks, those vendors still were at the wall, like waiting for the doors to open or selling to people on the outside. And you could just see that. After a while, this isn't going to work anymore. But, and he threatens them, if you keep coming around, you're in trouble. And I love that. That's pretty funny.
And in 17 and 18.
That's just human nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
17 and 18, he's like, didn't we just go over what our forefathers did?
Yeah.
And you're going right back to it? Like, what in the world are you doing? Why are you doing it again?
They needed a leader. They needed a shepherd. Yep.
Verse 18, that was pretty funny. The fourth example, that was...
Yeah, that's a
the fourth example where the people sleeping. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in verse 21, he says, I will lay hands on you.
Move along.
It's funny. So the fifth example is the one that they made, or
no, it is a fourth example. You had it right.
Okay. They started the pact that they made of not intermarrying people. The guy that stood up, made the covenant with, and started that charge. It was a big thing. A whole chapter was basically, and they go right back to doing it.
Yep.
And
they're intermarrying again.
And Nehemiah is not happy about this one at all.
Verse 26 is
Verse 25 and 26. You can read what he did.
Go ahead. Yeah, you were talking about that.
In 25, he beats them, plucks their beards out. Like, he is just going on a rampage. And then in verse 26, he talks about Solomon, and he's like, he's the wisest person to ever.
Yeah, we've had this conversation.
To ever walk on the earth, and strange wives led him to evil. What makes you think, not being the wisest person, that you would be different from Solomon? And
we made that point before, and now Nehemiah is making it with his people.
Who do you think you are?
And then the final one here is, once again, the high priest. this guy was political. I mean, he
Yeah.
was more political than he was high priest, because the first thing with Tobiah, and now we see his grandson marries Sanballat's daughter, the other bad guy, the main bad guy
Yeah.
in this, and he marries his daughter. Nehemiah, it just says he ran him off.
Yeah.
I love that.
Chases that son away from him.
I don't know, what's that mean? It's like,
Like
out of
a
the
whip.
out of the land? Is he hiding
An
somewhere?
old guy, just get off my lawn.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know. And then I got to ask you this question. I didn't talk to you about this before. So he says this repeatedly. He talks in verse 31, remember me, O my God, for good. There's multiple times where he asks God, verse 27, remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priest. There's multiple times where he's asking them, God, to remember him.
Yeah, verse 14 and 22, he says it.
Yeah,
says it too.
Says it. So, what do you think this was? I have an opinion. I want to hear your opinion before I say mine.
I kind of just think, like, we've talked about leadership is so important, and I guess he's not trying to be boastful, I don't think, like, oh, this wasn't my doing, Lord. I think it's more, I said in an order, and they still went against, I don't know. I
have a similar
put it
feel.
in words, but
like, please remember me, Lord. I did my best. There's unfinished business here.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
Israel continues to rebel. Please remember me, God. I tried.
Yeah.
That's my thinking. We don't know, but as you look through this, that's sort of the mentality I get. So, all right.
Yep.
Nehemiah, great book, and we get to the book of Esther.
So we got Thursday. We're already in Thursday.
Yeah.
But I think it will slow down a little bit.
So, if you've got the book and you're going through the book, Friday doesn't exist in that book for some reason. The 31st doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So we're 1 through 5 on Thursday, then we're 6 through 10 on the magical day that disappeared. So
the 31st.
Please read the whole book of Esther if you would.
I don't think you can put it down.
Yeah, you don't want to. You can read this one like straight through.
Yeah.
This reads like a novel. This is a limited series Netflix show. I mean, it is just so cool.
Yeah.
This book or account happens during the Persian Empire. This is halfway between. It's like Ruth, where it was a picture of what was going on in the middle of time. Like Ruth was a picture in the middle of the time of the judges. This is a picture in the middle of the captivity. It's at the Persian capital. The big thing that everyone mentions is God's name is not mentioned in this. Some people think, well, maybe because it was written in the empire. Who knows? We don't know. But we see God's hand caring, protecting for his people. So this happens during the reign of Ahasuerus or Xerxes the First. So this is somewhere, his reign was 486 to 465 BC. He's the son of Darius, and so he's between Darius and Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes is the one that sent Ezra and Nehemiah. So he's in between that period. He's known for invading Greece, and he sacked Athens in 480 BC. Then he loses this major naval battle at Salamis to Greece that same year. At the end of his reign, he will die by a coup in his palace. So this is the guy that we're meeting in the book of Esther, chapter 1.
And you can see the reign. His empire is huge.
It's huge.
172 provinces. So
it covers. If you turn to the back of your Bible and pull up a map, it covers what is known as the entire Fertile Crescent and the good majority of the north part of Africa. Not just Egypt, the whole north part of Africa. And, that was sort of the breadbasket for that region at the time. So this is who we're meeting in chapter 1. There's a 180-day feast going on in the country. 180-day feast. And it ends with this 7-day feast that he has in the palace with just the upper crust. And he's displaying his wealth and his power. And on the last day, he's drunk. And he wants to show off his queen. I'm imagining all these princes there that are drunk, or probably, who's got the prettiest wife type situation. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
It's probably pretty nasty.
Yeah. But it implies, he says, no. Have Queen Vashti come and I'll show you. And it's sort of implied that she was supposed to come immodestly dressed so he could display her to this drunk crowd of other rulers, and she refuses.
Yep.
As she's a pretty smart lady to do so, but no one tells the king of the empire no. And the princes, verses 16 through 22, they convince the king that Vashti's actions are going to have this ripple effect through the nation, and nobody's wives will obey their husbands. So the solution is banish the queen and now search the land for a new bride for the king, which we're going to see why that was probably, he was excited about that. This is a guy that, I've got a story about him that I read. Ahasuerus once, he was so erratic at times, he once executed the builders of a bridge because an ocean storm destroyed it.
Yeah, he was an angry guy.
Yeah, but then he commanded them to take chains to whip and punish the sea. Nah, who knows if that story's true? But that's pretty funny. That's just sort of a picture of who this guy is.
Yeah, he just gets angry.
Yeah,
you can see that throughout.
So that's Esther 1. This is the setup to what's going to happen the rest of this, and you can. Episode 1 is done, and you go into episode 2.
Which is the search for the new queen here.
Right.
And
they actually have made 2 movies on this.
Yeah.
But this would be a great...
I think I've seen one of them.
Some Christian writer, not somebody in Netflix or Prime, should actually do a miniseries. This would be awesome to put together.
So you first see the anger here with it. When the wrath of king was appeased. So it talks about his wrath a few times here.
Yeah, several times
and,
here.
The search for the new queen, and it begins. We see Esther as one of the women that are to be put on this really long trial basis thing.
All these young ladies they're brought from all over, one from each province, are all brought into the palace, and they're introduced. We have this long period of time come. This 5 through 11, we're introduced to Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jew that was taken captive during Jehoiakim by Nebuchadnezzar. So this is the same time probably that Daniel was taken. And so we see this is the time. And he's raising his younger cousin, whose name is Esther. She's apparently this beautiful young lady. And verse 9, she's given to the king's chamberlain. The king's chamberlain, you'll see many times, maybe I'd have to explain this, maybe I don't. Some of our younger folks probably don't know this. But a chamberlain was over the king's harem, and they were eunuchs. That is someone that was castrated to prevent them from taking the king's wives and that kind of thing. So that's who these folks are. And Mordecai instructs him instructs Esther, don't tell your ethnicity. Mm-hmm. Don't let them know you're a Jew. That's a big secret that's kept here. Verse 7, you'll see her name was Hadassah, also Esther. So depending on which language there.
Yep.
So here's the situation. So verses 12 through 14, these young ladies, they come to the kingdom for 12 months of basic spa treatments for 12 months. That sounds really cool, but the problem was they would, after that 12 months, they would have one night, and the king would sleep with that young lady, and if she did not become his queen, she went into his harem, never to marry. And the rest of her life she would spend in that harem. And what a terrible life for these young ladies. Obviously, she was in the king's house. They got to eat, but still, you don't get the life that you were wanting to have here. So this is risky for sure. That Esther was part of this, but they said I was reading why 12 months. One was to show they weren't pregnant, which that makes sense because you could imagine, oh yeah, I slept with the king and I'm having a child, and that kind of situation. And then one was, these treatments, they said it would lighten their skin, it would remove blemishes, all that kind of stuff. But this is the situation. And verses 15 through 18, Esther, she's chosen as queen.
Yep. And
now we see God's hand begin to move here. Because of that, we also see Mordecai. This is another big turning point. Verses 19 through 20, Mordecai is given some position on the court, and in verses 21 through 23, he overhears a plot against the king, and he lets Esther know the plot, and she shares this with whoever, and
saves the king's life.
The plot is foiled. That's Esther 2.
Yeah, and so that's episode 2, and then you meet Haman here, who is major player. It says that he's the Jews' enemy a few times throughout and he was promoted by Ahasuerus to his right hand man. And he gets like the ring and everything that can declare the stuff and make decrees. And Haman is an arrogant man, very arrogant, and he sees that Mordecai does not bow to him when everybody else does. So he's enraged by that and wants to kill him. And then kill all of the Jews once he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew.
Now, there's some interesting history here. Do you remember who he is with the Agagites? If you go, so here's some history as we go back. And you've read this, so this is the cool stuff that I like, where it ties together. You want to share this, or you want me to? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so if you go all the way back to 1 Samuel 15, when King Saul fails, King Saul is a Benjamite, all right, of the tribes of Israel. He's supposed to wipe out all of the Amalekites, the Agagites, which are part of the Amalekites, and he doesn't do it. Now we get to Haman. Haman is
an Agagite,
an Amalekite, and Mordecai is a Benjamite. That's just crazy. And he refuses to bow down. Now, we're not told why Mordecai won't bow down, but something probably because being a Jew, he just refuses to do that. So there's some rage there against the Jews. My personal opinion, it's because of their history as people with each other. It doesn't tell us that, but I think that's the reason. In verses 6 through 15, we see all his plans to not just wipe them out, but in all the provinces, just eradicate the Jews from the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he sends this decree out to all of them.
Yeah.
So and he sets a date on when they should do it.
Yeah, he tricks the king. He gives the king a half lie, half truth type situation where there's these people, and they have their own laws.
They're not good for it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they do have their own laws, but they follow the king.
Mm-hmm.
And he sells it to the king by enticing him with money. Like, if you do this, I'll pay that. Meaning, basically, when we kill these Jews, we're going to confiscate their land, and this is going to go into the coffers. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it. That kind of, it's just a small number of people. And the king agrees to it. And, yeah, we have that. We have the situation.
Yeah.
Great chapter.
Yeah, it is.
So, now we've got the build-up.
Yep.
Here's the problem.
So, Mordecai in chapter 4, he hears of this plan, and he is grieved, like, to the point where he is, like, laying in ashes and sackcloth.
I'm the reason why this is happening.
Yeah. And which then gets to Esther, and she is extremely grieved as well. And then you see one of my favorite parts of the book here.
Yeah.
Mordecai is Mordecai's charge to her and her response. Do you want to go over that?
Sure. He tells her, basically, you need to stand up for us to the king.
Think not with thyself.
Yeah. Finally reveal your ethnicity here is basically what he was saying. But she lets him know, the king's not asked me to come to him in 30 days. And back then you didn't just go into the king unannounced. Unless he dipped his golden scepter toward you or requested you to come, you could be killed instantly. So this is the situation. He's not asked her. So he says in verse 14, basically, don't think you're going to escape this, Esther, who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. One of the greatest phrases. And Mordecai here we see believed in God's timing and sovereignty over this situation. God's not mentioned, but that's the statement here.
Yeah.
And then she responds in verse 16. She tells him to pray and fast, and she says, if I perish, I perish.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Scene. It's just close at that point.
Roll the credits.
Yeah. Courage and faith here on display. And then we get to chapter 5.
And she does it.
She slow rolls this. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Queen Esther, she goes into the king, and he does dip the scepter toward her. So she goes in there, and she asks him, would you come to...
you and Haman
a meal, yeah, and Haman too. So Haman's all excited about it because this dude's full of pride. And
it's me. Yeah.
So he goes off to this thing, and then in verses 9 through 14, he's on his way back. He's on cloud 9. He's like, look, just the king and I and the queen, that was, I'm here. And as he's walking home, he sees Mordecai, and Mordecai won't bow down to him. And everything that's good happened to him is, Mordecai is there. And he just wants, he wants to have his head. And Haman's wife...
He was full of indignation. Yeah, he hated him.
So he gets home, and he's saying all this to his wife and friends, bragging, but also,
but this dude,
Mordecai, and they recommend he build a gallows that's super high, just so everyone can see it, and he planned the next day to ask the king, and that leads right into the next chapter.
Yep. So now we're into Friday here, and we've got the rest of Esther, and that night. It says, on that night...
Just so happened.
Yeah, I wonder how or why he couldn't sleep. But he couldn't sleep, and so he has his people read the records to him.
That would put you to sleep.
Yeah. And
it just so happened.
Mordecai saved his life, like what we read in chapter 2, where he was the one who told Esther that, hey, this is the plan. Yeah. And so then he asked, has this guy been rewarded? And
so he was awake enough to hear that, hey, this had happened, but nobody rewarded him. And now it's morning. This is the best. Now it's morning, and verses 4 through 11. He comes in, and
Haman comes in.
Yeah, Haman comes in. Oh, I gotta just read it because this stuff is too good.
Haman comes in, and he's in.
Who's in the court? Haman. Okay, so Haman comes in, and because he's going to ask him about. Even tells us he's going to ask about hanging Mordecai, and the king's servant said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth at the court. And so Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And he just pours it out, put the royal apparel on him, and put your crown on his head, and let apparel and the horse, and deliver him the prince's dragon, down the street, and basically a big old parade. Okay, that sounds great. And then said the king in verse 10 to Haman, Make haste, take the apparel and the horse that thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew. You can just watch his jaw just just dropping. Yet if he's looking at the king, his countenance can't change too much because he's going to get his head chopped off.
It's like a punch to the gut.
So he just has to take it. And he's like, you're the one that's going to drag the horse down the street. I love it.
Yeah.
It's the best. You really can't have a turn too much better than that. Oh, that's awesome. So that's just good stuff. Then 12 through the end of the chapter, here's a good lesson on the crowd you hang with. His wife and his family, they're quick to give him advice, but now they tell him, oh,
you're going to fall.
You're doomed. You're the one that told me to do this, but now, oh, man, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're not going to be the top dog anymore.
What a great crowd. So he's bemoaning this in verse 14 and not grasping that his plan is completely unraveling in front of him. And it tells us at that time they came to get him. It's time to go to the queen.
Yep.
She's going to have this feast. And only God could have orchestrated all this stuff. This is just great stuff.
A whirlwind of emotions for Haman.
Up, down, up, down, up, down, 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 down.
Yeah.
And we get to chapter 7.
So we have Haman, Esther, and the king at this feast, at this meal, at this banquet, or whatever you call it. And everything is, like, Haman is beyond upset at this point. And the king asks Esther, like, what is your request? Like he did earlier.
Up to half my kingdom.
Yeah.
That's always the response.
And Esther then reveals that she is a Jew. And
well, that her people had been sold, yeah.
Yeah. And asked the king to get rid of her adversary who's trying to kill her people, and the king asks who that person is. And I can just see, like, both heads turn to Haman, and he's, like, sheepishly standing there. And
it's interesting. She does the blaming without blaming the king, because he really was part of it. He signed off on it. But she's at least wise enough to...
Yeah, she would have been killed.
Him.
Yeah.
This man, Haman.
And the king is so mad, he takes a walk into the garden.
Yeah. And
while he's away, Haman is begging, because he knows he's about to be killed. Like, if that such erratic, like, angry king is, like, they know who he is, and he's just went and took a walk, and he's coming back, you're gonna get killed.
So if you get a feel for most people believe at that time, instead of like sitting in chairs like we are now, the tables were lower. And they were more like large pillows that they sort of sat sideways on. So you get this feel that he is on this pillow on top of her begging for mercy.
And so when he comes back in, he's like, are you trying to force yourself on my wife now?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
And
they just grab him.
Yeah. And the gallows that he made to hang Mordecai, and he is sent to those.
Yeah, so either the chamberlains don't like Haman, or they love Queen Esther, or both.
Yeah.
Probably both. And they're the ones that point out to the king, oh, by the way,
see that?
See those gallows over there? He just made those for Mordecai. How about we hang him on that? I mean, it's their idea, and he's like, definitely, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so he went from being arrogant to begging for his life in the matter of a day.
Yeah.
And you can just see God's hand over all this. Even though it's not mentioned, you can see it all over the place.
It's just cool stuff.
Yeah. That's the chapter right there.
Yeah. So chapter 8 comes along, and so we still have a problem here. We've got this decree that had gone out. The king finds out who Mordecai is in relationship to the queen. So he's promoted, and she goes into the king once again. So it doesn't say, that he had called her, but she takes the risk once again, and she says, we need a reversal on this.
Well, she realizes such a vast empire, like, in order to send something, it's not a text message. Like, you have to...
Correct, yeah.
You got to do it now, or it's not going to happen.
The problem with the Medes and the Persians, though, is when the king decreed something, it wasn't reversed. So the law, the thing that she asked the king for, he just basically has to give something that would override it or would be greater. So he says, okay, here's what you can tell. The Jews are allowed to protect themselves. So it's coming from the king that they're allowed to protect themselves. All the leaders are going to see the king is for the Jews, so they're going to back them up at that point. So most people are going to back down, and this is sent as quickly as possible through the nation. It showed the king's support. And then verse 17, because of this, it says, many people became Jews, for fear of the Jews fell upon them. That's incredible there. We live under a decree of death due to sin, but God, he made a counter decree for us as well, right? This shows he gave us salvation through Jesus Christ, fulfilling justice through his son. So we see sort of this justifier thing that we can, if you want to tie this to our faith as well. So this is the decree that's sent out from the king, and we get to chapter 9 now, and we see it actually take place. The day arrives.
Yeah, that original day that Haman created, that day comes, and the Jews were to be slaughtered, but the opposite actually happens. And
but isn't this interesting though? There's even back earlier on, it says there was a lot that was thrown by Haman to determine what day this was going to occur. Even in that was God ordained, because if it was earlier, there would have been no time for all of this to occur. But God allowed this to happen far enough away that this can go on. But go ahead. We get
it happened far enough away that she could actually do it without just straight up asking the king to do that. So the opposite happened. The Jews defeat their enemies, but they do not take their plunder. It kept saying that. It
says that twice. Verses 10 and 16 both.
And then,
which shows their reason for doing it was just protection. It wasn't to gain. Right. There's 500 killed in the palace area with the 10 sons of Haman. 75,000 throughout all of the 126 provinces.
172.
Was that? Okay.
There's a lot,
and what used to be the Feast of Purim, what was going to be this doom and victory, now it's turned into a day of victory, and they celebrate this. They still celebrate this today.
Yeah, and it was established by Mordecai.
Yeah, that's pretty
cool.
Celebrating something from the Persian Empire.
And then chapter 10 here. You got Mordecai. He's the man.
He becomes that,
I don't know.
We say that every week.
I know.
There's somebody is the man.
I do say that. It's been like 5 weeks in a row. But he's the one who says he is the wise man, like the wise guy behind the scenes, following the Lord and like helping Esther through this. And then you see he's rewarded for that. And you get this in the last 3, and he, like with the feast, he establishes that. And it's, I don't know. It is super cool that they still do that.
When I think of this book, I've written down here, I think of Proverbs 21:1, which says, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will." And these guys think they're top notch. I think of this, when the United States presidency and things of that nature. They think they're the ruler of the world, but they're really in the hand of God. And if he needs his will to be accomplished, it will be accomplished. So another thing I saw in this, in Exodus, we see God used miracles with Pharaoh. Here we see God use natural things, and still he accomplishes his will. Even though the free will of man is there, we still see God's sovereignty come about, his will be accomplished. I also think in our own life, if we think of this, Mordecai and Esther, they didn't sign up for this, and yet they grow in their faith through this situation because they're forced into this. It had to be dealt with. If they didn't, people were going to die. but on the back side of it, they grew in their faith. They were strengthened in this trial. It's the same with us. There are things that are going to come in life, and we don't want them to happen, but at the back side of it, we have grown in our faith because of that. So that's what I have for Esther. Great book.
It is.
Yep.
Did it in 2 days.
Well, they're short chapters.
Yeah.
Compared to 8,000 names in the last few chapters of Nehemiah.
It does. It is like a novel.
Yeah. It reads. Yeah. It's an account, a story of that time.
Yeah.
So that ends the historical books. I hope you've been keeping up. If you haven't, catch up. In fact, I would tell you to start here with Job. If you're not caught up, start with the book of Job where we're at, because we are in a completely new section. The historical books are done, and now we enter into the poetical books of the Bible. Now, poetic doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means it's written in a poetical form. Every type of literary device is used here. People call Job the crown jewel of Hebrew poetry. A lot of people think it's the greatest piece of poetry that was ever written. I don't read enough poetry to make that. If God
we are not
it,
poets, so
I think they figured that out by week 22. A lot of people consider this the first real book, because all the other books prior to this were compilations, scientific things that were just natural observations. They lacked a plot or discussion of man's situation and things like that. Here we see Job. It's a full book. There's the full information. The story is told. He's going to mention scientific stuff that's not going to be discovered for 1,500 years after this point. He's a real guy. He's mentioned in the Old Testament with Ezekiel. He's mentioned in the New Testament with James. He's real.
Yeah.
This is a real man. Go ahead.
These events happened like during the patriarchs too.
Yeah. Between 1800 and 1600 BC.
So like you said, we're not following a path. Don't think about this has happened after the Persians.
Yeah.
Or that.
So now for this book, you shift all the way back to the beginning in the book of Genesis, around the time of Abraham. This book was written. So really, if you look at all the books in the Bible, this is the oldest book, because the book of Genesis was written by Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So it was written way after that. So this is the first book that was really that was written there. He lives in the southern part below Israel, or Canaan, or whatever you want to call it, in the land of Uz, which is part of Edom. Most people believe that's near the city Petra that's around today, south of the Dead Sea. Who do you think wrote it?
I don't know.
None of us know.
I don't know, but it makes sense that, I think Elihu.
Yeah.
Or, him, Job, maybe Moses. Some people were saying Hezekiah. I heard Hezekiah.
What?
Yeah, and other random, like Jeremiah, Ezra.
Elihu, I think it's Elihu, because, and here's my reason why. When we start reading to this, he's a young man that's going to be mentioned later in the book. He doesn't show up at the beginning. In Job 32:16, the phrasing changes. When you're in the book of Acts, and when Luke shows up, it's us, we type stuff. Similar type thing happens when Elihu shows up. The phrasing changes there. So that's my reason.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's broken into three. When you go through this book, it's broken into three parts. There's a prologue of 3 chapters. There's an epilogue at the end, and then in between there is this dialogue, chapters 40 through 41. What's a prologue and an epilogue? Those are they're written in prose, meaning just ordinary language, sort of narrative type language. The middle part, the dialogue, it has symmetry, it uses literary devices and all that kind of stuff. The main theme as you're reading through this book, this is a tough book to read, I think. when you're reading through this, the main theme is, why do the righteous suffer? Is that similar to what you had?
Yeah, with just yes, I had notes on how hard it was to read this.
Yeah, so
because you don't want to hear someone in pain.
Yeah.
And that is.
And he's just pouring his heart out.
Yeah.
Why do the righteous suffer? Keep in mind Job 23:10 as you study. So mark that verse. I got some things here. I don't know, but I when I got to the opportunity to teach through this book years ago, there's 4 types of suffering that are mentioned in the Bible. I don't know if we got time for this, don't we?
Yep.
Okay. So the first one is persecution. That's typically undeserved, allowed by God, and comes from someone else. All right? That's persecution. Punishment is suffering that is discipline inflicted by God. No. I said that wrong. Punishment is suffering deserved that comes from another. So persecution, undeserved, allowed by God, coming from another. Punishment, suffering, deserved, comes from another. Then we have chastisement. That's the one I messed up on there. That is suffering that is discipline. He's inflicting, like we would discipline our child. All right, that's chastisement. That's either through a circumstance or through a person. But it's administered out of love and the hope of betterment in our life. And then there's affliction. Affliction is undeserved, but it's permitted by God, and we may never know the reason. And that's where we're at here. So persecution, punishment, chastisement, and affliction. So as you read through this book, think of 3 different things here. Who is in control during struggles in life? How to minister to a suffering friend. We're going to see some guys that don't do that. And then the third, how do we suffer as a child of God? How do we learn to suffer as a child of God? So those are the 3 things as we go into chapter 1 of the book of Job.
So then we meet the guy named Job.
How to know? How to know you don't read your Bible?
Yeah.
Job.
Who's Job? No, we meet Job.
1 Corinthians.
Yeah. Or all the Chaldeans and all that. But we meet the man who was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Eschewed evil.
Eschewed? Yes. Oh, we use that all the time.
And
what's that mean?
Shunned is what my Bible says.
Yeah, turns from it.
Yeah. So you'll see this riddled throughout the chapter where he's perfect among men. He's great among the people.
That means just a man of integrity.
Yeah,
perfect doesn't mean he doesn't make mistakes. It just means he's a man of integrity.
Yeah. He did right. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, basically, like we were talking about.
Obedient, reverent, that type of thing.
And you see that God blessed him. He had a big family. He was wealthy. And then you see this conversation between God and Satan.
It's unique, isn't it? If you don't have this, it would completely change the understanding of this book. You would just see a guy suffering. But we get to see behind the scenes what's going on. Yeah. Verses 6 through 12.
So whoever wrote this, I think it proves the inspiration of Scripture here, because how do they know what God and Satan were
how would they know this situation in this man's life? Because at the end, God speaks directly to them, so they know God's involved with this. So, this is a picture. I don't know if it proves that, but it definitely gives us that insight that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Because the people on earth don't see this happening at all.
Yeah.
It's happening up in heaven.
So Satan is walking on the earth. It says up and down, down the earth, and I just see this you mentioned it right before that God brought up Job. Satan did not bring up his.
Verse 8, God brings up Job to Satan. Describes him. He brags on him. The sons of God. This is the angelic beings. Even the fallen angels are there with him, and God brings up Job.
And Satan challenges Job's faithfulness, and he says, "Okay, he's so great because he has all this stuff."
Yeah, almost accusing, not almost. He's accusing God.
Yeah, and so if you take that away from him, he'll curse you.
Yeah, he's only serving you because you give him something in return.
Yeah, and so God, it's not a bet. You can view it as a bet.
It's not at all. Yeah,
it can be easily misconstrued as a bet, but it is not. And God allows Satan to take.
So he allows him to lower the hedge around him of protecting him, and he lets him attack with limits.
Yeah, you cannot take his life.
Yeah, so this almost seems like a bet if you just take it, if you don't look at the full picture. But we got to remember, God's omniscient. He sees it all, and he's the one that brings up Job. So God's going to use Satan's eagerness. He knows what Satan's going to do because he's God. He's going to use Satan's eagerness and hatred to reveal himself, God, to Job, to man, and we'll see here to the angels as well. And he's going to show Job some things about himself. He's going to show Job who he is, and God is I think God is honoring Job as one of his prize people by putting this confidence in him to show what true faithfulness is.
Yeah.
That might sound twisted to you, but I think that's what it is. This is going to be instructional for us, for what we're reading it now, and it's instructional for his angels, and on and on it goes from there.
So we see Satan
just one by one.
Yeah, you just see 4 things happen where someone comes and gives him bad news back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
And all of basically his wealth and the earthly things and his family, like his kids were taken from him at this point.
That's the hard one to take. The whole losing your house, your animals, all that kind of stuff. Well, maybe to some people that's not. Maybe that's a big deal to them. But, it's a big deal. I mean, obviously you lose your home, you lose your car, you lose your animals, that kind of thing. But when you lose 10 children die like that, and
after the other 3 things,
to know that was, here's the part that, and we're not going to be able to answer this, but this was all under, God said, okay. God's permission allowed Satan to do these things. So how do we grapple with that? That these 10 children, whatever age they were, it sounds like they were adults at this point or close to it. I think it indicates that we see life different than God sees life. We see life as these few years here on earth, where God sees our life with eternal value. And Genesis 18:25 shall not the judge, capital J, of all the earth do right? He is going to do right. So how does that reconcile with what's going on here? I can't answer that, but we know we have to have faith that God is good, and he's going to do right. And that's what we see here. And Job,
his response is incredible.
Yeah.
The Lord gave and taketh away.
Yeah.
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
And in all his days Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly.
Unbelievable. That he was willing, naked came I out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return thither, and then the Lord giveth, the Lord gave. So
blessed be the name.
Yeah, it's a great song. Job understood that all we have, including our family, is a blessing from the Lord. And Job didn't sin falsely accusing God. Rather, he blessed. It's beautiful. So,
chapter 2, we have another conversation here with God and Satan.
I call this round 2.
Yeah.
It's like a fight. Yeah.
And God again brags, basically, of his faithful servant.
And we don't know how long's between the two.
Yeah.
Did he let him
like a week or?
Yeah. Did he let him sit that way for a year? Was it 2 days later? We don't know.
So Satan counters it again by saying, well, he still has his health. And so,
if you're making an argument, that's a good argument.
Yeah. And so he'll continue to serve you, but if you take that away, he'll curse you. So then again, God takes the hedge away and
just don't kill him.
Yeah, just don't kill him. And then you see his response again.
Yeah, he's got boils.
Yeah.
Sitting in ashes.
And his wife is saying, curse God and die. Yeah. But he does not.
As we go through here, he will have itching, insomnia, running sores, scabs. He'll talk of nightmares, bad breath, like horrible, weight loss, chills and fever, lack of bowel control, blackened skin, and disfigurement.
Mm-hmm.
All these things. Yeah. So his wife comes. Why do you think his wife didn't die? I heard someone give me a really good answer on this. You can get yourself in trouble.
I'm not saying anything.
Yeah.
But maybe it was like a Delilah thing, where
she was one more torment to him, that kind of thing.
Or Samson wanted to die rather than spend another.
Nagging. Somebody came to me and said because when we marry, two become one. So he wasn't allowed to, I thought that was a pretty good response. His response to his wife is interesting. I'm not going to be too rough on her. It's a funny answer, but she's in anguish. She lost 10 kids also.
Yeah.
Men can compartmentalize typically a little better, but she
lost everything too. Yeah.
But he reminds her not to be foolish, not like the other ladies of this world. Don't be foolish, but remember we're to be faithful in blessing and adversity.
And all this did not Job sin with his lips.
No, he doesn't. So Job's wife leaves, and we don't know where she goes. It doesn't tell us. And his 3 friends arrive to mourn and comfort him.
The shortest man on earth. The shortest man ever.
Bildad the Shuhite, exactly. He shows up this week. It took him a long time to get there because he's so small.
So I've got something with the...
Go ahead.
I cut you off, but the mourning and the sitting there and comforting him without saying a word for 7 days.
7 days.
Yeah, it reminds me, sometimes all you need is a friend that just sits there with you.
Yeah. We don't always need to talk. That's a hard thing to learn. I'll just, even in pastoral ministry, you always want to have that right thing to say. And sometimes it's just keep your mouth closed and put your arm around them and have empathy with them.
Which reminds me of a time I had with my buddy Joe. Both of us were going through, we were a great crowd to be with. We were just going through a hard time.
Not a good day, huh?
We were heading up to Dayton for a college class outing, doing laser tag up there, which was really cool. But we were both an anxious mess. 45 minutes, we did not say a single word in that car ride for 45 minutes. But it was so comforting that both of us were there, not saying a word. But if I went up there by myself, I would have been a wreck.
Just give knuckles to each other at the end
and really, kind of, yeah. It was all right, let's go play laser tag. It was we didn't try to solve each other's problems, and it was just the comfort that both of us gave each other through that. I don't know. That just reminded me of it. We didn't need to say anything. Yeah, it's just being in the car together.
As we move on with this, we see that it is a noble thing that they stayed, because next we're going to see what they were actually thinking, and it would have been nice if they'd have stayed quiet for another 7 days.
Yeah.
But it was quite noble for them to do that without saying a word.
Yeah.
Which gets us to
chapter 3. And Job is lamenting, wishing he was dead.
Yeah,
even more than that.
Curse the day he was even born.
Yeah, he says, like, don't even recognize that day. Like, wipe it off. That day, wipe it away.
Yeah, he finally breaks his silence, because he doesn't say anything for 7 days either. And he's just depressed. And, how couldn't he be depressed, right?
Utterly depressed.
Yeah.
Like,
depression hits great people. I mean, if you look through the Bible, you'll see Moses was depressed at one point, Elijah, Jonah, Jeremiah. Jeremiah asked, all of those men asked to die at some point.
Yeah.
Serving God, they all get to such a point they asked to die. Great men are I don't know if you can see our bobblehead up there. That's Charles Spurgeon. He's not there every week. We got a different thing every week. But he suffered with depression as well. And it's in depression, though, that we see the Lord, that he didn't leave us. If everything's good, we say the Lord's with us, we never having a chance to even know sometimes. But in depression, we see God's there with us, even through this. And he asks, why was I born? Curses the day he was born. Curses the day he was conceived, even. That's a little further. In verse 11, why am I alive? Basically. David does this in Psalm 142, his heart pouring out in pain. Your thoughts aren't rational when you're in this. And then in verse 20, why can't I die? He wants to die, but God's not letting him die. Yeah. He can't eat. Verse 24, his emotions are uncontrollable. His fears are coming true. He's lost all sense of security in his life. And I would tell you, as you go through this, it's okay to ask why, but it goes to the next point when we expect an answer, demand an answer from God. Then you've gone too far. It's okay to ask why, but we go too far. And I got some other things here, but I think I'll skip over those.
Yeah, so chapter 4, Eliphaz, he starts the first series of conversations here.
Yeah.
And
this is where Job wishes they would have stayed quiet. Yeah.
So he basically suggests that Job's suffering is a result of sin, right?
Yeah. Well, before we start into this, let me encourage you to do something. This book, you can lose track of who's talking. And I would encourage you, when you get to the beginning of each chapter, underline who is speaking. I would also recommend, here's something I did when I was studying this. I would read it, but I would also get on like the Bible app or the Bible.is app, and that have a dramatized audio version that uses different voices for the people, and it'll really help you as you go through this.
Yeah.
So it's important who's talking when you go through this.
Yeah, so
read through a whole person too. Like Eliphaz is going to speak for 2 chapters. Read both chapters so you get his complete thought before. There's going to be 3 lists of conversations that go on through this book. The first set, each friend is going to talk to Job, each of the 3 friends, and Job's going to respond back to them at each time. So we're going to see Job went from the hand of Satan, and he sinned not. Now he's going to be in the hand of his friends, and he doesn't do quite as well with that. So go ahead. They begin this argument.
Eliphaz basically believes that it's Job's sin that is causing this, and that the innocent does not perish as he is. And
if you were right with God, you wouldn't be suffering.
Yeah, and he tries to confirm this with describing a vision of emphasizing that a man cannot be more righteous than God in verse 17 there, and he's basically saying you're in this because of your own doing.
Yeah. The wicked suffer, the righteous don't.
Yeah.
That's not biblical. But that's the thought here.
Yeah.
If you were right with God, you wouldn't. Yeah, and he uses this weird mystical experience that he had.
Yeah. I didn't quite understand it, but
verses 18 through 20, the thought that you're another non-biblical thought. You're like a moth, nothing but dust, and God isn't interested in your small little life, as basically. That's contrary to what we see in the Word of God. He's definitely interested in our life. Be careful with experiences and feelings defining your beliefs, because that's how Eliphaz lives. And then he continues on in chapter 5.
Yeah, so now we're into Sunday, continuing with Eliphaz's thought here, where he suggests that the suffering is a form of correction from God, and then he urges him to use this as a time to refine himself.
Yeah. This is God's chastening and correcting on his life. Verses 17 through 27, and he is beating him up. This is not a friend being kind at all. I would say this: God never meant for the word of God to be used as a weapon to beat someone with. Yes, to correct, to challenge, to reveal sin even, but not to beat someone with.
Yeah.
And that's what we see here. He's just mercilessly beating him with the word of God.
Yeah, verses 3 through like 15, 16, even pretty much the whole thing. I was like, dude.
It is, yeah.
Calm down.
Verse 27. 20. Am I in the right? Yeah, 27. Yeah, ye overwhelm. I'm in the wrong verse. There it is. Lo, this we have searched it. He's talking to about him and the other guys. Lo, this we have searched it. So they're in agreement. So it is. We know what's right.
Hear it,
and know thou it for thy good. So we've talked about this already here, and we're right, and you need to go do it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
And then Job responds.
Yeah, and he defends himself here, and he defends the legitimacy of his anguish here, because basically Eliphaz is saying, this isn't what you're saying it is. This is what I'm saying. What your misery is true. What you're saying is not.
Yeah, he's crying out for understanding here. Eliphaz breaks the first rule of counseling, which is listen.
Yeah. And
he doesn't do that. He just, here's what we've been thinking.
Bam.
And if it's they've been quiet for 7 days. So that means they talked about it as they were getting there. That's how that had to have happened.
Yeah.
So he says in verses 2 through 6, sorrow is heavy as wet sand, and life was tasteless. Verses 8 through 10, let me die. He's begging God. Verses 12 and 14, he says, show me some sympathy. He says, am I a stone or brass? Show me some kindness here.
Mm-hmm.
Verses 24 and 28, teach me, and I will hold my tongue, and cause me to understand wherein I have erred. If I've made a mistake, it says, then look upon me, for it is evident unto you if I lie. Show me some compassion, he's basically saying. So he defends himself, and he criticizes their harshness and arrogance.
Yeah, in 25, what is your arguing doing? What are you trying to prove here?
Yeah.
In verse 27, it says, ye dig a pit for your friend. I'm in a pit, you're digging it even more, basically.
So it's very poetic, but get the sense of where he's going with this. And then he continues his answer in chapter 7.
Mm-hmm. And this
is more just crying out.
This is hard to read.
This is, yeah.
It's not natural for people to enjoy reading this. This is one of the reasons why this is not the first books that you're like, oh, read Job.
read the book of John and Job.
Yeah.
Just for some light reading.
And he's grieving, complaining, questioning why he's going through this. And it says he feels like he's the target of God. It says something about him being the mark of Almighty or something. Yeah. And
verses 1 through 5, he talks about wasted days. The thing that got me there was the long nights. I mean, when you're sick,
it's the worst.
Night, if you've been sick, if you've gone, nights last forever. Yeah. And for him, he's just lamenting this.
He says he's basically feeling like he's not getting a break. When he's awake, he's in pain, all that. And then when he sleeps, he's getting
tormented,
visions
even in his
and
dreams.
nightmares.
Yeah, verses 11 through 16.
And
I choose strangling, he says.
Yeah. And then at 16, it says, I loathe it.
Yeah.
He just
Yeah,
he calls his life worthless. He's just
17 through 21. Have I sinned? Is that what's causing? Is this not a typical thought? This is a perfectly rational thought on, why is this happening to me? Have I sinned? Is that what's causing all of this? In a time of trial and pain, it's wise to search our hearts. Is this chastisement of God? But you'll know that very quickly. If you're holding on to sin and you refuse to let go of some sin.
Yeah.
But when that sin is not there, you're still like, just know God isn't around us in some mystery that we have to figure things out, some ancient sin in your past that you didn't know. No, God doesn't work that way. Conviction of sin is known, and it starts to grow in severity. He wants you to repent of sin, and he'll let you know that. But our mind goes to Job's thought, what did I do? He didn't do anything. Yeah, I got verse 20, like you said. It feels like there's a mark on him.
Yeah. Yeah, Job was just ready to be dead before going through another day.
And we're going to see this continues on. Stick with us with this. I know this is going to be some tough reading, but this is it's very helpful. You will remember, it's hard to read through, but afterwards you will go back to this in your mind. There were things in this book that your heart will take hold of, and it is healthy for us, and I encourage you to continue to read. All right, please give us a joke to take us out of this.
To wrap it up, I have a joke from Connor Graber.
Connor, all right.
So, it's going to be good if Connor's giving you a joke. He's been banned in the middle school class of saying jokes. So, if you have 13 apples in one hand and 10 oranges in the other, what do you have? Big hands.
That's good. I like that one.
It was actually good, so I was like, "All right, I'll give you credit for that one."
That's good.
All of his other ones are terrible, but that one's good.
I like that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very good. We'll continue in the book of Job this coming week. Get in the Word of God. Don't give up. All right. Love you guys. Have a good day.